With photography, you have an image and you capture it, With music, you have a song and you play it, and then you might, write a tune or so. But painting, you're looking at a black canvas. You got to come up with something. What are you going to come up with? Well, how do you get there?
This photography podcast is brought to you by Frames, quarterly printed photography magazine. Here is your today's host, W. Scott Olsen, with another fascinating conversation.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast from Frames Magazine. My name is Scott Olsen, and today I have the real honor, the pleasure of talking to one of the icons, one of the real masters of American photography, Adger Cowans. Adger is I can't even say a fine arts photographer because that would limit him. He's portrait, he's landscape, he's fine arts, he's all over the place. And a tremendously talented and successful painter. His work has been in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the International Museum of Photography, the Museum of Modern Art. The list of galleries and museums goes on, as does the list of awards. So often, looking through photography, we look at the image and we forget who actually pressed the shutter release for that one. I am amazed by how many photographs have gone by that have got the Adger Cowans name behind them. Adger, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning.
How's life out on the East Coast this morning?
Oh, it's a little bit chilly here today. It's probably going to clear up a little bit later on today. But it's wonderful. I love this kind of weather anyway.
It is getting on towards winter. We've got fall going on. The colder days can be pretty inspiring sometimes. I am humbled when I look at your work, sir. I look at the not only the images, but the intent behind them, and I find real inspiration there. Tell me, in your writing, in your book, you talk about the importance of family when you were growing up and the importance of music when you were growing up. Tell me about the really early days, even before you understood yourself as a photographer. What was forming the artistic vision that became you?
Well, I really don't know. I think that as I grew and I began to think about it in later years, I was a big daydreamer. And I can remember my mother having to come to school. I think it was Mrs. Tyree's class. I guess probably 5th, 6th grade, something like that. So my mother came to school to find out about me. And Miss Tyree told us, she said, Adger's a good student. When I call on him, he usually has the answer. But after that, he's always daydreaming. He's always looking out the window, and I did because I don't know. I could hear everything, but I had a very intimate personal life growing up, and I think that sort of led to the fact that being an artist, you have to have time to dream and think and imagine, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's kind of where I started, but I didn't realize that too many years later.
Were you just daydreaming about anything? Was there something about, looking at the walls or looking out the window?
Oh, I was looking out the window. My seat was by the window. So I was always looking out the window and looking at the birds flying and the light changing on the trees and the airplanes way up in the sky and just regular things that was, kind of on my mind about life. And I was excited about life. I think even as a kid, I ask a lot of questions, what's this, what's that, and I think that whole concept of being in my head as a kid and being a daydream really helped me out later on in terms of understanding myself as an artist. My mother was an amateur photographer and my uncle was an amateur photographer. But when I was really little, I started in music. I started with the trumpet when I was, junior high school. My uncle gave me his E-flat trumpet. And so I played trumpet all the way up through college. I had gotten a scholarship to Capital University when I was getting out of high school. I did not want to go back to high school. They said, we will give you a full scholarship, but you have to go back to high school and brush up on your English and math, which was terrible. I said, I don't want to do that, So I went to see my teacher. She said, Adger, I think this would be a very good opportunity for you. Everybody was telling me that. But I didn't want to go back to high school. So I was sitting around the house all that summer. And my mother said, you're not going to sit around all summer and not do anything. You're going to have to do something with your life. So my sister's boyfriend had a magazine, one of the few magazines that had photography in it. I think it was Modern Photography, Popular Photography, one of those. And in the article, it said, Ohio University gives degree in photography. So I said, bet. I had no idea of what that was going to be, but I had taken, an elective in high school, photography, and I liked it. It was fun. I wasn't that excited about it, but I didn't have to do anything else. I could be in the darkroom. So she showed it to my father, and, my father said, that's ridiculous. He said, Kodak makes a camera. They send you the film. You send it back, and they send a picture. What is this? Going to school. I'm going to spend my money in college. You're going to study photography. Anyway, my mother sort of leaned on it a little bit. My mother was a very, very sweet person. So she kind of leaned on my father. So, well, honey, that's what he wants to do. So I registered for Ohio University in the fall of 1954. I didn't know what I was getting into. I really didn't.
You say in your book that when you enrolled, you were only, quote, looking at things that were interesting. You didn't know how to merge emotion and image.
I did.
Talk to me about merging emotion and image. I mean, not only historically, how did you discover that, but really, what do you mean?
Well, I think that I was always a very quiet person, sort of a daydreamer. But I was also, very, how do you say? I was into a lot of things. I was a paper boy. I was in the Boy Scouts. I was a Cub Scout. People in my neighborhood would always call on me to go to the store and get things for them when I was really small, And this is like, right after the Second World War. So things were really tight back then, in terms of everybody not having money. I mean, we had stamps, what they called war stamps, and every family had a book. And in this book were pictures of tanks, men with guns, ships, airplanes, all this type of thing. And when you went to the store to buy food, they would tear so many out. Everybody had it, all families, black, white, anybody in America. They were saving the good meat and the good things for our boys who were fighting the war. I remember that so clear. And if somebody in your family was in the war, then you had a flag of whatever they were there. I had two uncles in the Navy and one in the Army, so we had these flags. So that's kind of where I grew up in that kind of situation. So I learned how to make money on my own by running errands and doing things for people in the neighborhood. But I think the idea of being able to understand what photography was about. I mean, my first year in college, I did like all other students. I partied. Second year, I partied.
Of course.
Yeah. And then the third year, I don't know, something happened to me. And I began to realize that this thing about photography was really important to me because when I would show people my work, they would say something about it. And I took that and I listened to what they said, and it gave me a sort of a window into their soul, a sort of cheap psychology, because what they would say would a lot of times tell me who they were. If they liked it, they didn't like it, if they responded to something in the photograph that I had done, and they saw it and said, oh, I like the way you did such and such and such. But it was cheap psychology. And I think that's what really got me into being more serious about photography. I mean, I liked everybody. I mean, most everybody that I looked at. But I think the first person that really inspired me when I was in school was Edward Weston. And it wasn't much the image as the tonality that he had in his photographs. it was otherworldly. It was like almost 3-dimension. So, and then, my father kept saying, well, I don't know what you're going to do. And so my uncle said, why don't you find somebody black that's doing what you want to do? Well, in those days, you didn't say black, You said Negro or colored. So he told me, and I said, I don't know anybody. All my teachers are white, and I don't know if there's anybody black. So I asked my teacher, Walter B. Allen, if there was a black person that he knew of that was a photographer. He said, I think there's a guy at Life magazine, Gordon Parks. So I guess it was 1955 or 56. Life magazine came out with a big book of Life magazine photographers, and he was in it. And so I wrote him a letter, and he said to look him up when I came to New York.
This is sort of a famous story, though. I mean, this letter here, you didn't just send him a generic, dear Mr. Parks, I like taking pictures. Can you help? I mean, you had to have said something in the letter that caught his interest. Did you send some samples along? I mean, how did you approach that?
No, I just sent him a letter and told him that I was a student at Ohio University and that I come to New York because we would drive to New York on the weekends if Miles Davis was at Carnegie Hall or if Monk was at the 5 spot. We would drive to New York with our teacher, David Hostetler, who was a sculptor. And we would all pal in the car. Charlie Held, Jim Dine, his girlfriend, and E.J. Tracy, and myself, and a couple other people, and we'd drive to New York. So one of the times I came there, I called and told him that I was in New York, and he said, well, come up. And he told me how to get there, and I met him at White Plains. And when he turned the corner in a powder blue Thunderbird, leather and fluid, he had shades on. I said, oh, God, I'm definitely going to be a photographer. Because I had no, idea of what that was about or, anything. But I think while I was in school, those last couple of years, I got very serious about photography because I realized that I could do something and I didn't have to talk. And if I showed it to somebody, they would tell me what they saw or what they felt. And that helped me in terms of what I was doing as a photographer, trying to capture that feeling, and it became very important to me to understand what it was that I was doing. And so I didn't come up with this idea, but it began to dawn on me that all the great photographers that I like Ansel Adams and Weston and Stieglitz and Clarence H. White Jr. was my teacher. So, I was taught that whole concept of photography as art. So I began to understand the idea of personal expression. So I began to pay attention to how I felt when I was taking a picture. And it seemed to me that I would see things, but I couldn't capture it. I wasn't either fast enough or I wasn't ahead of it. I was behind it, whatever. So I began to practice with my camera so that I didn't have to look at it when I was going to take a picture. So that gave me this timing was very important. And so I learned how to not look at my camera and deal with how I felt. And then I began to understand that you really don't take pictures with your eyes. You take pictures with your heart.
And I should tell everybody who's listening, by the way, of course, you have a website. It's adgercowans.com, ADGERCOWANS.com. And I hope that the people who are listening to this are looking at that website simultaneously. You call out in your writing somewhere that image of the children with the 4 balloons as being the first one that of your own photographs that moved you.
Yes.
Tell me the story of that photograph and how that's played out in your history.
I learned to drive a car early on. I guess I was 16, and I was really excited. I wanted to learn to drive a car, and so, I learned to drive a car, and I got my license. And as soon as I got my license, I knew I had done the wrong thing because my mother said, go down and take your grandmother to the store, to the country. She got to and go over here and take your aunt so that. Then I became the chauffeur for everybody in the family. I said, oh, this is a bad thing. So anyway, this particular day, she asked me to go down and pick up my grandmother at church. And the church was right beside East Market there. So while she was in church doing something, I was walking around with my camera, and I saw these kids and the balloon man on the corner. And they were just looking at this blue balloon man with such, if they could have one, they really wanted, but they didn't have any money. And at that time, it was cheap, like, 5 cents, 2 cents for a balloon, something like that. So I bought a balloon for each one of them. And then I said, can I take your picture? And they were so excited about me taking their picture. So I just stood them there and shot that picture. And when I looked at it later on, first I thought, nobody wants to see a picture of poor kids holding balloons. But then when I really looked at the picture and I showed it to other people, they said, those kids are really happy. Look at their faces. And that's when I began to understand that I had caught this emotion that touched other people. They didn't see them as poor, raggedy kids. They saw them as these kids with happy faces and these balloons. And that shot juice into my arm and to my whole life. And I began to understand what that was. And so then I really began to search pictures out. Well, not search, I became a hunter. I would walk down and look for things. And it's always going on in life. It's all around you all the time. It's your timing to catch it. People say, oh, that was a great picture. Well, it was, but you didn't take it. You were busy talking about what a great picture it was. People always say, oh, that'd make a great picture. Well, you didn't get it because you were talking. So I found that you had to be very quiet inside and that you had to really, really look and feel what it was that was going on around you. So that just, being the kind of signature thing for me to do in anything that I photographed, whether it was abstract, whether it was portrait, whatever. I was looking for that moment when the person I was photographing let go and stopped posing for me. I didn't like people to pose. I wanted to capture where they were at that time in their life or in their mind. And I found that when I relaxed people, and I would, and then I started being a big mouth and talking. How you feel today? What's going on? To get people to begin to relate to me as not the photographer, but another person. And I found that really worked really well. That if I could get people to relax and not be uptight about being photographed, so, oh, my hair, my this, my that. And that wasn't what I was after. I was always after the emotion.
So help me out with your timeline then a little bit. You graduate from college, and then do you go into the Navy then, or do you work for Gordon Parks then, or?
They happened together. Yeah, that summer I got out of school, I came to New York on the 12 o'clock bus with $12 in my pocket. And my brother said, where are you going, man? It's 12 o'clock. I said, we got to catch the 12 o'clock bus. So I caught the 12 o'clock bus to New York, and I checked into the Y at 34th Street. And the next day I called Gordon and told him I was in New York. He said, where are you living? I said, I'm at the Y. He said, get out of there. Get out of there. Come up here. I didn't understand what was going on. I mean, I saw guys running around, hugging each other. And, I didn't know anything about what gay was. But Gordon, I guess, was ahead of me. He said, get out of there and come up here. And he told me how to get the bus to White Plains. And I went up there, and he looked at my work, and he said, great, great, great. And he said, well, I'd like you to work with me at Life Magazine, be my assistant.
You make it sound so easy there. All you do is just go to New York,
It was magic. It really was. I didn't have to go through a lot of searching around and all that. That came later on. But that first year that I got out of school, I went up there and he said, you can live with me and my family and work with me at Life magazine. So Gordon Parks Jr. and I became really good buddies because he was maybe a year or so older than me. And he played the guitar, so we became fast friends. And I would get up and go with Gordon in the morning, and then in the afternoon I'd come back, and Gordon Jr. and I would play around or do whatever we were doing. But I think it was almost like a magic thing. I worked with Gordon all that summer. And toward the end of the summer, Gordon Jr. and I got an apartment in New York. Toward the end of that summer, my mother called and said, you got a letter from the White House. I said, Mama, read it. She said, it's addressed to you. I said, my mother was very funny. I said, read it. She said, well, it says, greetings from your friends and neighbors at the White House. You've been selected among the fortunate few to serve in the Armed Forces of the United States of America. Please report to the induction center on such and such a date.
Oh, my.
I'm in New York. I work with Gordon. I don't work. She said, well, you better get behind here, So I had to get on the plane and come back. I left all my stuff there. Some of it I never saw again, negatives and stuff. I just left everything and I went home. And I had been in the reserves when I was in high school in the Navy. So I went to my old CO and I said, Chief, I don't want to go in the Army. I'd rather go in the... He said, well, you didn't report back and return your name into the draft board. So you're going to have to be in the Army crawling around with a gun on your belly. I said, no, I want to be on the boat. He said, well, if you go in right now, by the end of this week, he said, we'll change and you can be in the Navy. So I did. And so that I didn't get to go back to New York. I went right into the Navy that week. So
you were a photographer. You were a photographer for the Navy.
Yeah, I was a photographer. Well, that's another story. After boot camp, I won the American Spirit Award, which was something they gave out to most outstanding recruit in that graduating class. There were 5,000 sailors in that class. So, I was surprised. So I got this award, and with this award, you get to be an honor guard for whoever the president is. They have these, when the president shows you, so somebody from each part of the service, the Navy, the Army, and, you look sharp.
Right.
Right. And then the president shows you show. So Eisenhower was in that. I said, I don't want to do that. They said, what's wrong with you? This is the easiest duty in the world. Everybody wants this job. I said, I don't want to do it. I want to do photography. And they said, well, what do you know about it? I said, well, I went to school. And they said, okay, all right. So if you pass this test, then we'll change your duty station. So they gave me 40 questions, verbal. They talk, what's this, what's that? And I answered every question, and they were like amazed. They said, well, I guess you are a photographer. So they changed my duty, and I ended up going to Oceana Naval Air Station in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Oh, man. I'm looking at your portfolio here, which is all over the board. There's an intense curiosity on your part, which is one of the things that I think comes through in the pictures. But I can't say that you are one type of a photographer or another type of a photographer, because you are both at the same time.
Well, that's the way we learned. That's the way we learned in school. We were taught all forms of photography, architecture, commercial photography, photojournalism, portraiture, all of, it wasn't specialized like people are. I like some guys do, well, I only photograph food, or I only photograph studio work. We had everything. So that was my background in terms of studying photography. And I think that Clarence H. White Jr., the son of Clarence H. White Sr., who was one of the few photographers that showed at Stieglitz's Gallery 291. So he had that kind of background, Clarence Jr. did, so that's the way he taught. So we had to learn everything. We had to learn how to develop color. We had to learn how to print. We had to learn to mount, all of it. So when I got out of school, I had a real good grounding in all forms of photography. But I was very, as you say, inquisitive. I didn't want to be doing just one type of photography. I liked whatever turned me on. So that's how I have all these different areas of photography. But I think it still boils down that all of my photography you look at, it all deals with emotion, no matter what it is. Even the movie work that
That's a perfect transition, because the movies is where I was going to go next.
Mm-hmm.
How did you break into taking production stills? I'm looking at some of them on your website right now, and I have to ask you about one. This is from on Golden Pond, and it's the picture where Katharine Hepburn has her head on Henry Fonda's shoulder. That image became one of the icon images of that movie. I don't know if it was on posters or billboards or whatever, but I mean, that is a signature piece. And I'm wondering if the cinematographer didn't look at that and say, oh, great. The one visual image everyone's carrying is not through the movie camera, it's through the still camera. But tell me how you got into movies.
Billy Williams, who was the DP on that, we got along really good, and he liked my photographs a lot. Sometimes there's a little jealousy between the cinematographer and the still photographer, but we only photograph what the cinematographer sets up. So, but it's all, again, in terms of the business, they want a picture that has emotion, or it has something in it that they can use to advertise, and that's what that was about. But we worked in Lake Winnipesaukee all that summer. But I got into movies, again, quite by accident. I had worked on a movie, Cotton Comes to Harlem, which was the first picture done by a black director in a major studio, and that was Ossie Davis. Well, I worked on a movie, but they gave me a permit. The union gave me a permit. They didn't let me in the union. They said because Ossie Davis wanted black people somewhere involved behind the camera, not just in front. So I got on the movie, and I guess it was about halfway through the movie. One of the sound guys said, he said, there's a union that you could join, and you can do this kind of work all the time. I said, well, I don't want to, be in the union. This is, you're working every day. And I had been a freelance photographer. So, you work a week and you take a week off, or you take a month off. So the idea of working every day, I didn't like that idea. But then he told me, he said, well, you should try. He said, there are no Negroes at that time who were in the union. He said, and I think the kind of work that you do is really good. He said, I think it's perfect. So, but that was after I got in it because Sidney Poitier wanted a black photographer for some film he was going to do. And so I went down to see him. Somebody told me and gave me the number. So I went to see him, and he came in and he looked at my portfolio, and he was, nice photographs, etc. And then he got to a beautiful, gorgeous picture of Diana Carroll. And he closed the book and walked out. And I didn't know what to do. I was just sitting there, I didn't know what to do. And then his producer came in. He said, I think that Sidney had some, maybe flashbacks because he had done a movie with Diana Carroll called Paris Blues, and they were engaged at that time, and it didn't work out. So I think he still had some leftover feeling. Anyway, his producer said, I like your work. He said, you're a really good photographer. So I got a friend who's making a movie. I want you to go over and see him. And I had heard people tell me that. I said, yeah, okay, all right. Give me his number. He said, no, sit there. He called him on the phone and said, I got a guy here. I want you to see him right away. So I went over to United Arts, and the guy looked at my work. He said, this is the kind of stuff I look for in still photography. He said, you're a really good street shooter. He said, I think you'd be good in the movie business. And he hired me right there on the spot. So that was the first movie I worked on, Cotton Comes to Harlem.
Is the picture of Diana Carroll the one that's on your website?
Yeah. She's turned around laying on a couch like.
That is a striking picture. Tell me about some of your pictures of musicians. I'm looking at this one of Keith Richards, who looks like he's 200 years old. But
yeah, he's the funny guy. He was playing. That was the picture I shot while he was actually performing. But he kind of stopped and was talking to the audience at that time. And that was at in New York at the Apollo. But because I love music so much, and I really thought that's what I was going to be, I hang around still to this day. I have a lot of musician friends. I met all of them, you know. And Dexter Gordon was wonderful. Archie Shepp. And that shot of Archie Shepp was like, you know, I just love it because it's him. He's not playing the horn. He's just sitting there being Archie Shepp, you know, and I really, really love that picture of him. I love the picture that I shot of Miles, too. All these guys, you know, I just love musicians. That's all. And I always wanted to capture something that spoke about who they were, you know, without them playing. I mean, I got a shot of Dexter Gordon playing. He's into the horn. You can see, and he's got the sweat rolling down the side of his. But the feeling, it's about the feeling. It's always about the feeling for me in anything that I do.
That is a lesson that, you know, you hear and you understand, and it is so hard, I think, for, you know, beginning photographers, intermediate and advanced, you know, to keep that in mind, you know, that you're photographing something well beyond just the documentary value. You're
Right.
photographing something of heart and spirit.
Right.
Tell me why most of your work, not all, but your photographic work is black and white.
Well, I think that black and white reproduces in the mind as just natural. I mean, we see in color, but I think that we think a lot as photographers in black and white. Because black and white, if you look at it, really good black and white, there's a sense of color in terms of the light. You know, it's always about the light, the movement of the light. And the black and white can really feel almost like color sometimes. You know, color sometimes destroys the feeling of an image, you know, because then they soup the color up and it's super bright. If you're going to shoot color, then shoot color for color. Don't try to mix it up with something else, you know. And a lot of the photographers that I liked and talked to are great black and white. I mean, Roy DiCarava never wanted to shoot color. He said he wasn't interested in shooting color at all. That he felt, and he didn't like flash either. He felt all that destroyed the natural feeling of what the image was, you know. And I mean, you know, and you will never find a color photograph of Roy DiCarava. But when you look at the tonalities of what he did, those grays, those rich grays and blacks and whites, they come alive. They come alive. And I think that that's what it was all really about, you know. I mean, Gordon had to shoot everything because he was a journalist, but he too was a big black and white person, you know. And I think most of them are. You look at Eugene Smith, Jesus, that shot of Schweitzer in Africa. I mean, if that had been in color, you would have lost all that feeling. You know, it's a shot of Schweitzer, shot from his head is bending over, and he shot it from the top. You see his hair hanging down. He's working on something, but beautiful, beautiful. Now you go with somebody like Pete Turner, who shoots color. I mean, he's one of the great color photographers, but he shoots color for color. He doesn't try to mix that up with something else. Not that it can't be done. There's some photographs that are really great in color, but I think that for the most part, I'm a black and white photographer.
You do have several images on your website and elsewhere that are in color. And of course, we're going to get to painting here in just a minute. But I want to ask, you know, these days it's easy to shoot in color. You go to Lightroom and then you flick back and forth between, you know, but do you, if you're thinking of yourself as a black and white photographer, does that affect the way you're looking at the world? Does that affect your composition, your sense of light?
Well, I think so, yes, because you're in control, you know. You can't say to somebody, we almost got that picture, but the guy walked in front of me, or I shot it at the wrong spot. You're in charge. You're in charge of that camera. You have to balance your feeling, your movement, what you're looking at, the frame, the exposure. You got to do all that. And I think that takes a lot of concentration and it takes a lot of practice. I used to shoot a roll of film every day when I started. It got to be a little bit expensive, so I bought a daylight loader. So I could shoot, cost me a penny a shot practically. So then I'd load up 100-foot roll of black and white Tri-X and hit the streets. Because you got to do it. It's like playing an instrument. First of all, you got to play those scales in every key. But then you have to play it so many times that it becomes natural almost, Then you can express yourself. You can start with the tune, and then when you finish it and you go to the refrain, you can start playing what you feel. That's what jazz is. They play the tune and everybody plays what they feel about it, or how they're feeling that day, or the keys and the notes and all that. But you can't do that unless you practice all the time. Coltrane was practiced all the time, every day, all the time. I mean, Eric Dolphy, somebody said Eric Dolphy, the reed on his horns never got dry. That's how much he practiced.
I like that. There's a good lesson in that. Let's make a switch now, because you are not only a world-class photographer, you are a world-class painter. And your painting is vibrant with colors, and it is all abstract, expression. Your paintings just seem to leap off the canvas. If I didn't know better, if you were to show me your paintings and show me your photography, I would say, is this the same person doing both of these? Who's doing the paintings? Tell me about that. What you're doing there.
For me, the reason I wanted to start painting was I wanted to do something with my hands. I wanted to create something from nothing. With photography, you have an image and you capture it. With music, you have a song and you play it, and then you might, write a tune or so. But painting, you're looking at a black canvas. You got to come up with something. What are you going to come up with? Well, how do you get there? I mean, you can go to school and you can study painting and how to mix colors and all of that. But, you don't learn how to be a painter, or you don't learn how to be an artist of anything in school. You just learn the technical end. And for painting, I was more interested in making the paint the subject as opposed to painting a bird or a tree or an apple on a table or anything like that. So I was more into expressing the color of the paint as the subject. I mean, Kandinsky was the artist that I really, I liked Kandinsky a lot. Wilfredo Lam, I liked him a lot. And of course I like Picasso, but I think that the main dude that really, and I read his book on it, and I felt that he was right in the sense that you can have 5 painters and they all can paint a bottle on a table, but it's still a bottle on a table. But if you express your inner self, then everybody's different inside. So if you connect with that inner part of yourself, then you paint what you feel. And he took it to another level because he started using, biological structures to make art, as opposed to the structures the other artists were making. So he was very creative in that way. And so that kind of that released me from having to say, I don't know how to draw. I can't be the artist. I don't know how to draw. It's not about drawing. You want to be a good draftsman, then set up the bottle on the table and draw it every day in different light forms. I used to make my students do that with the camera. Go and shoot something every day, one thing every day with the change of light. And then you learn something about how light works with things. You have to have a feeling for it. Emotionally, for me, painting is very emotional. I mean, it's all emotional, but painting, there you are with all these colors and a blank canvas. What are you going to do? You can't find it in a book. You can't copy it from somebody else. You can't copy Picasso. I mean, if you want to learn to draw, yes, you go to the museum and you copy all the great statues and all of that. And that's great. And you learn you get your hand together and your eye and hand coordination to draw. That's basically what drawing is about. You have to do it over and over again so it becomes second nature. You can't just start drawing, it's control. And so I think with me, getting control of the color and making it express what I feel, I guess it's toward something like abstract expressionism to a certain degree, because you're using paint in not a formal way, but an informal way. You're making the paint the subject.
I love listening to you talk here because you keep talking about both control and freedom. You talk about technical mastery and then the ability to express yourself. And that is, of course, very much like jazz. I mean, you can't do improv until you've got the scales, until you've got, you've got the foundation to build on.
You can't do anything, any art form, until you know and understand what it is. You can't be a good writer until you understand writing. You can't be a good dancer until you dance. People have natural qualities to do all these things, but you still have to practice. You have to use your body. You have to use your machine to make it work the way you want to. And that's discipline. You got to have discipline. And then you can create something. You got to know what it is. You can't create out of something and you don't know what it is. You can. And there are a lot of people that do. And it comes out like crap because there's no discipline behind it, no understanding of what it's about. You're going to say, I'm going to be an abstract painter, and you don't know any painters. Well, okay, that's good. You don't have to know any painters, but you're going to have to paint a lot because somewhere along the line, you're going to paint something that somebody else has done already and think that you've created something original. It's like Miles said, every trumpet player owes at least two of the notes that they play to Louis Armstrong. Because he was the one that, the first one who came along and really made it. I mean, okay, Coleman Hawkins. Coleman Hawkins, man, come on. He brought that tenor saxophone into jazz. He was the first one. You got to look at what the masters did first. Look at Thelonious Monk. You got to know what these people did and how they expressed what they expressed and the feeling that is in there before you run out and do something and think you created, what was it? I think when Jackson Pollock did what he did, everybody was like, oh, my son can do that. Just splatter paint around. Anybody can do that. He's just throwing around. But what they didn't understand is that he had something in his mind. He had an idea about what he was doing. He wasn't just throwing. He was dancing the paint into different forms. He didn't just throw it. He danced with it. He made a form out of the movement. And then out of that form of movement, it was very much, when you look at it, very akin to nature. Nature is like that. Nature takes all these different forms, and he just danced the paint, So
absolutely,
what you're dealing with, and it's great because when you get into it, you realize that as an artist, you're really doing spiritual work. It really is.
Tell me what's next. Tell me what you're working on now.
Oh, I'm working on trying to get a big book done, and I want to do a book of water photographs because I've been photographing water for a long time. And I think that the first show that I had of them, they were 40 by 60 inches. There were 16 of them. And when people would come into the gallery to look at them, most Americans would walk in and say, oh, it's water, and they would leave. Or they say, oh, that's pretty, or that's interesting, and they would leave. But the other people that came in, the Asians, the Japanese, the Chinese, all these people, they would sit down and look at it before they went to look at another picture. They would go around the gallery looking at it and letting that energy from that painting wash over them, because we as bodies, as human bodies, are 75 to 80% water. It's like a direct connection. It's like plugging yourself into an electric socket, but you have to be still. You can't be jumping around, and, you have to be still and let it come to you. It's just like when people go and walk out in nature in woods, and then you come back home, you are energized. You don't even know that nature has energized you. What do you feel when you go by the ocean and you go to the beach? You don't even go in the water. You just sit there for a while and you say, I'm going home. When you come home and you take a shower, you feel energized because that energy in the water has connected to you. It has healed you. Water is very healing to the soul and to the spirit. But people don't think about it. Just like people cutting down the trees, and trees are saving your life. They're cleaning air. Why would you cut them down? We don't understand the things that the Creator has put here to give us life. We're destroying it. For the guys, we got to make money. We need this and we need that, and electronics, and we don't need any of that. All you need to do is connect to what has been given to you as a spiritual being. We're all spiritual beings. People say, that's hokey pokey.
No, that is hardcore truth, man.
People sometimes confuse spirit and religion, and spirit is spirit, and religion is religion. Spirit is made by the Creator. Religion is made by man. Who is that nut?
Well, whoever that nut is, I want to go spend more time with him. Sir, this has been very interesting and a lot of fun. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Frames. Because excellent photography belongs on paper. Visit us at www.readframes.com.